All right. So, like I said before, thanks again for doing this. My first question to you is tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the community.
Yeah. So I graduated from grad school like about a year and a half ago, and I sort of took a long journey to figure out what I wanted to do in becoming a therapist. So when I was really young, I always loved to read. I always had my nose in a book. Um, and when I got like to college and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I had like tried marketing and English, and I did a few internships, and I just really hated them. And so then I was taking the Amtrak train home from college to visit family, like just before graduation, and ended up sitting down with a next to a teenager. And I remember thinking like, oh, they just look like they need someone to talk with. And so I just started asking them some questions and started telling me about their life. And I was realizing, oh, I love hearing people's life stories and like remembering of how I love to read. I've always loved to read. And so I was like, oh, maybe there's something like that where I get to just listen to people tell me, what their life has been like. Um, and things that have been important to them. And I remember getting off the train and being like, I think that's like a therapist, maybe. Um, and then throughout my 20s, I had my own struggles with like anxiety. And so I went to therapy and I found it so helpful. And so I kept thinking about that it was something I might like to do. And then in 2020, I turned 30. And I just kind of remember asking myself, like, why don't you go back to school? Like, if this is something you're interested in, what's holding you back? And I realized it's just that I was afraid. And so I picked up my fear and went forward anyway, and decided to go back and did grad school through the pandemic, which was quite an adventure. And then, yeah, like I said, graduated about a year and a half ago. So that's my long, winding story of how I ended up as a
Mm.
therapist.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool story. You got on the train and then you thought, huh, this is something that I could do. It's
Yeah.
pretty cool. So like fast forward to today. So what do you currently do as a therapist?
Yeah. So my training is in marriage and family therapist. So primarily that means I work in relationships. So it doesn't mean you have to be married, it doesn't have to be a family. It could be like business partnerships. It can be like any type of relationship, really. And so I primarily work with couples. Um, and my absolute favorite thing to do is help couples figure out, like, if people are on the fence about whether or not to get a divorce or stay together and try and work things out. I love working with them to figure out what the right decision is for them. Because the way that I see it is like sometimes, staying in the relationship is not actually what's best for everybody. Sometimes being able to end a relationship is what is going to, be the most helpful and fruitful and productive. And so my favorite thing is and that's usually a short, like 1 to 5 sessions that I'll do with couples. Um, and then I also really like working with adult individuals. So there's not two people in the room, but we all are surrounded by lots of relationships. So even if I'm just working with one person, I can look at it through a relational lens. Um, and so one of my favorite things is like helping when I work with individual clients is helping them feel empowered to go after the thing that they want and like figuring out what is it that I want within work or, in free time or pursuing a passion or a relationship and then figuring out like what's holding them back from going after it. So similar to me, like what was holding me back from going to grad school was fear. And so I love working with people on figuring what is it they want and how can I help support them to go and go after the thing that they want.
hmm Yeah, it's a unique perspective. Like it's like it's not you, but it's me. It's like that sort of talk before. People say that a lot. Like it's not you, it's me. And so people go in different directions. And so yeah.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that is interesting that it's not you, it's me, right? Like, yeah, it's just me holding me back from my dreams, right? Like, what am I doing that's keeping myself from the thing that I really want?
yeah. So my next question is, in your current role as a therapist, what sorts of methods or strategies do you use to work on with clients? Because like you said, you work with couples primarily, so.
Yeah, I use a little bit of I think of myself as an integrative therapist, which just means I want to try and find the like theory or modality that's going to match with the client the best. Um, but also with that in mind, there are some that I tend to be drawn to again and again or find myself using over and over. And one is I love pulling from the Gottmans or the Gottman method. They're pretty popular in this area, and just popular couples and relationship. They have tons of books. So that's one. I think with that, I feel like it really can help couples with communication and being able to like listen to each other and hear what the other person's saying. Um, and then another one that I really like to use is something that's called internal family systems. And this is the idea of like, I don't know if, again, with that example of me going back to school, it's like part of me is really excited to go back to school, but part of me feels terrified. And so what we do is we look at the different parts. So it's like, okay, if the part of you that feels so afraid, like, what does that part look like or feel like? Is there any memories associated with that part? And so we can sort of explore all those different parts of ourselves and then extend like compassion and understanding to the part. Um, let's see, it gets a little more complicated that, but I don't want to bore people. Um, but I think that just as like a high level overview, it's that understanding that we've got sometimes conflicting parts that want different things for us. Or like with the relationship, part of me wants to stay, married and in this relationship, and part of me wants to leave. And so we can explore those two different parts. And then I'm also a yoga teacher. So anything that brings the body in or the breath, so I think especially with conflict, sometimes, it's like we're breathing shallowly, our bodies are in that fight flight response. And so like being able to work with people where they can like take deep breaths, realize if they need to take a time out, be able to like soothe the body. Um, and that looks like, if I do that with clients, it'll look like me doing a breath exercise of like, or saying like, hey, can we just check in with, can you take a deep belly breath in the middle of this conversation? Or are you breathing shallow and fast like you're running away from a lion? Um, and then sometimes doing things like progressive muscle relaxation with clients just to help them feel a little more connected to their body and hopefully more at ease so that the nervous system can feel a little more relaxed, especially when having hard conversations.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what if people said to you, like when they come and visit you and say, like, "Hey, I'm having this problem with my partner, with my spouse." What have they sort of said about you and how you kind of help them sort of navigate their struggles?
Oh, that's a really good question. Something that it's funny, it makes me kind of want to go look at some of the reviews that clients have given me on my website. But something that I've heard is just that it's very helpful to learn like communication skills. And I've also heard from people about like really feeling heard. So I think in society, a lot of us we're not so good at listening. We're really good at like giving advice or talking and having conversations, which is a whole nother skill set. But I think a lot of times I'll speak for myself. A lot of times, like I just want someone to listen to me. And I hear that a lot from my clients of like, oh, feeling heard. And then especially in working with couples of giving them the tools so they can hear each other. So that's something that I've heard clients say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've had this friend like one time where she's currently doing therapy and she told me like I try to find like a female therapist that kind of understands and knows where I'm coming from because if that relationship doesn't go very well, then it's not going to work. So,
Yeah, that's a really good point, and actually something that I was just thinking about the other day of like when looking for a therapist, like really feeling like comfortable and like you've got I don't know how else to say this besides like that there's a good vibe. And like that's so personal, right? And like if you feel like there's a sense of connection and chemistry and comfortability with a therapist, because you're like talking about really, I don't know, deep and vulnerable things. So I think if you can, the more comfortable you can feel, the more effective it's going to be. So yeah, I love what your friend was saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My last question in all this is, what can people take away from this conversation? How can counseling, help people, like with their struggles and like make them feel more positive about themselves and kind of more comfortable with themselves? Because oftentimes, people are struggling and they don't know where to turn to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the one of the things that I found with counseling is it's a lot about learning about myself. And so I think that that's something that can be so valuable for people. Um, like learning what either like triggers are, right? Or learning about patterns that you have, like, oh yeah, why do I keep showing up in romantic relationships like this, right? Um, or why do I keep like pushing people away? And so I think sometimes that like if you can understand like how past events in your life influence how you currently like interact with people, the choices that you make, and like I think therapy can help you explore that, then you can become like freer to make different choices that are going to get you more towards like the relationships or the spaces, the career, the life that you want to have. So I think it's a lot about like self growth, self exploration, and yeah, just getting to learn about yourself.
Yeah, and kind of that self-discovery kind of phase. Yeah.
That's a perfect phrase, self discovery. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.